For a long time, there was tragically little awareness, especially in this country. There weren't enough of us working on this, and there was always some other problem that was at the forefront, even many times for environmentalists. In the last 4 or 5 years, that's really begun to shift. And unfortunately, it's begun to shift because the world has made it abundantly clear what's happening. When the Arctic begins to melt, when every high-altitude glacier starts to melt, when we begin to see epic drought, when the chemistry of seawater changes, well, eventually it grabs your attention. Sometimes it grabs your attention in a really dramatic way, like Hurricane Katrina. People began to understand that we were going to need to change. Now, that understanding hasn't yet reached the point where people understand just how much of an emergency it is and how quickly we need to change and how deep that change needs to be, but at least the discussion is open now. And our job as we try to build this movement is to make that discussion much deeper, much more real, much more science-based, much more powerful. Whatever we do wrong, I'm going to have to live with it for 30 years at most, knock on wood. My daughter's going to have to live with it for 60 years, Kids are much more motivated. They're much less scared of change. If you haven't spent your whole life driving a car, then if someone says, well, maybe we'll have to figure out ways to do things that don't require driving by ourselves in cars everywhere, it's not as scary. And I work a lot with young people in part because they're so good at taking advantage of these new set of tools that are the one wild card we have. The ability to network globally, to use the web, to use Facebook, to use Twitter, to use all those tools is the one way that we have of countering the enormous advantage in money and power that comes with the fossil fuel industry. And so we've made a lot of use of that around the world. And it's American kids who are doing this, but we've organized programs, climate camps for kids from across Africa, for kids from across Central Asia. I've been in Australia and New Zealand with their great youth campaigns. Just came from India where there are 300,000 kids in the India Youth Climate Network. I mean, it is inspiring. It is great. Well, we need ways always to make this real to people. So Will, has the incredible credibility of having watched change happen across a part of the world that's remote to most of us. It's one thing to sort of hear abstractly from scientists that the Arctic is melting, and another to hear it from someone who's watched it melt. I spend my life now out around the world, meeting people, hearing people tell their stories of how their lives are affected and destroyed, watching people die from dengue fever in Bangladesh, seeing farmers who can't get their crops in because there's no rain, on and on and on. So the ability to share those stories, since I'm at heart a writer and communicator, is important. It's the kind of thing that we need if we're going to build the sort of consensus that we need to actually take action. I'm not an activist or an organizer by nature, I'm a writer, and that's what I've spent most of my life doing. I wrote the first book about climate change 20 years ago, which a lot of people read, but it failed to solve the climate problem somehow. And so in recent years, in a kind of despair over our inaction, I've become more and more of a sort of organizer. We organized a march across my home state of Vermont 3 years ago now. That was the first big thing like this in the country, about 1,000 people, which is a lot of people in Vermont. That grew some months later into this national campaign that we called Step It Up, that managed to organize 1,400 simultaneous events across the country in the spring of 2007 and change Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton's position on these issues. And then we came to understand just how deep this problem was. After we'd done that, that next summer was when the Arctic melted, when it became clear that we needed deeper cuts and that we needed a real global presence. Organizing a global movement is an intimidating prospect. People insist on speaking different languages all over the world. It's very hard to do it. There's a great gulf between rich and poor, on and on and on. But we had one asset, this number provided for us by the world's leading climate scientists in beginning of 2008. They said 350 parts per million CO2 is the red line. Above that, as they put it in the abstract of the peer-reviewed paper they published, we can't have a planet similar to the one on which civilization developed or to which life on Earth is adapted. Now, that's a strong sentence, and all the stronger when you know that we're already past 350. We're at 390 parts per million. That's why the Arctic's melting. It lets us know that this is not a future threat, but a present emergency, and one we've got to address right now. And so we've been building this huge global movement that'll peak on the 24th of October with actions in every corner of the globe. We think most of the countries in the world will have something going on that day. It'll be the most widespread environmental protest of all time. And we think it'll help move the negotiations in Copenhagen in December on a new climate treaty, help move them closer to the science. It's heavy lifting, you know. We're obviously not going to solve the problem in Copenhagen, but we can make it the beginning and not the end of the process if we do our job right. It's about 6 weeks before Copenhagen. We wanted it to be close enough that media would pay attention, but far enough away that we had still some chance to influence the sort of positions people were taking going in. And it also turns out to be, although we didn't know it at the time, World United Nations Day, which around much of the world is taken very seriously, not so much in this country, but this is the first issue on which international collaboration is not just a nice idea, but absolutely required if we're going to do anything at all useful about it. And so it's a good day to be doing it. The world is changing very fast. We hold out no illusion that we can stop global warming. What we're playing for now is trying to slow it to a pace at which there's some hope that civilization and natural systems can adapt in some way or another. That would be victory in this case. I mean, there are times when hope is scant, you know, for me. I mean, the name of the book I wrote about all this 20 years ago was The End of Nature. I'm not, you know, an incredible optimist. But to see people all over the world, young people and poor people and people from every religious community taking up this fight is very powerful. To open the email and see a picture from 1,500 Buddhist monks and nuns in Ladakh forming a human 350 against the melting glaciers in their Himalayan kingdom, or to see an email with a farmer in the Cameroon in West Africa and his neighbors who've planted 350 trees on the edge of their village, that's very moving. They didn't cause global warming. They're trying to do something about it. And it certainly, whether it gives me hope or not, it gives me deep determination to try and match that faith that they have in the system to accomplish something.